Mrs. Hoover's art class. Today we're going to create a weaving. Do you know what a weaving is? Maybe you have this weaving in your house, or this weaving. Maybe you are wearing this weaving, or maybe this weaving. Have you made these? Or maybe you have weaving in your hair. So a weaving is when you overlap threads to make a separate piece of fabric, or you can use other materials. Often it's yarn or thread or even paper to make something a separate structure. People used to have to weave to make their own clothes. For thousands of years, people have been weaving. We don't weave a whole lot today because we have our clothes already made by companies that do the weaving for us. But weaving has been around for thousands of years. Another thing that is often woven is rugs. The Navajo Indians have been making beautiful rugs for hundreds of years. First, they cut the wool off the sheep, and no, it doesn't hurt them. It's kind of like getting a haircut. Then they clean the yarn and twist it together on a stick. Some people would use a spinning wheel to do this. Then once the yarn was made, it was put on a loom, and the artist would weave the yarn in and out of the strings. You can also make beautiful weavings to hang on the wall. These artworks are made up entirely of weavings. Aren't they amazing and beautiful? Let's look and see what some other students have created. What do you want your CD weaving to look like? To make a weaving. You will need a CD and some scissors, an embroidery needle, and some yarn, plus some other colors of yarn, and some tape. The first thing we need to do is we need to prepare our loom. Now in this project, our CD is our loom, just like you saw that big wooden structure that had the strings on it. Well, that's called a loom. This is our loom. So you can use a lot of different things for a loom. You can use a piece of cardboard or wood. So we're going to use a CD. So let's do that right now. Okay, so to prepare our loom, our CD, which is our loom, we need to wrap the strings around it, which are the warps. Now I have a skein of yarn. This is a skein of yarn. You can get these at Walmart or Hobby Lobby or a lot of places that sell yarn. And we need 9 feet of yarn. So you need to measure out 9 feet. You can use a ruler or a yardstick, but you need approximately 9 feet. Okay, so I have cut off 9 feet of yarn. I'm going to use that for my warp. And then on my CD, on one side of a CD, it is shiny. The other side has the printing on it. Normally, I like to weave and have this be my front. But because of my camera, it makes it so shiny you can't hardly see what I'm doing. So for my demonstration, I am going to actually use the back, what I call the back of the CD, and that's where I'm going to do my weaving. And you can do it either side, either way you want to. I would suggest the shiny side because I think it's really pretty, but I'm going to demonstrate on the back. So you're going to take your yarn and you're going to tape it on the back of the CD. So you see how I have it right there. If you could see it with all the shiny, take a little piece of tape and tape it down. Okay? Now I'm going to put my finger over the center, flip it over, and pull my yarn through. Going to make my first warp. Okay? There it is taped on the back, and I'm pulling it through. Now I'm going to wrap it around, and I'm going to come back to the center here. I'm putting my finger here. I'm holding it tight. I want to keep the warps as tight as I can. So I've wrapped it around. I pull it over. I'm holding on to it. I put my finger here, flip it over, and pull it through. Wrap it around. Put my finger here. I'm holding on to it. Always keep it tight. And pull it through. I'm going to do this 21 times. I want 21 warps all around my loom. So 21 warps. I wanted an odd number of warps. Almost said even. Odd number of warps. So I can have 21. If I wanted to, I could have 23. I could have 25. If you get too many, it kind of becomes difficult to finish the project. There's some grass there. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it around, keep wrapping. Notice that I am lining them up. I'm not just going over here and over there and over here. I'm doing them in a row. That will make it easier to weave. So I'm going to do 21 warps. All right, that should be 21. I'm going to check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 18, 19, 20, 21. So when I've got 21, I'm going to flip it over, keeping it tight, get another piece of tape, and tape it down. Then I can cut off my excess yarn. So again, you want to make sure you don't have an even number. You can't do 22. It won't weave correctly. You can do 23. You can do less, but it is not quite as pretty. So now I'm going to space out all my warps. I want them to be evenly spaced. I don't want to have some that are really close together like that, for example. So like the spokes on a wheel, I'm going to space these out. Now if you notice that your warps are not very tight, mine are tight, I've done this before, but if you notice that your warps aren't very tight, you can flip it over, and I have my students do this a lot. You can flip it over and you can tape, after you've spaced them out, you can tape the warps in place, and that really does help when you're weaving because they don't slide around, and that way you're sure to weave in the right places. So just take some tape. Now I don't want my tape to show on the other side. It's like a little piece there peeking out. I don't want that. Now I am ready to do my weaving. So I have lots of different colors of yarn that I just pulled out. I have a big yarn bag. I just grabbed some different colors. And I like to use lots of different colors in my weavings, but you can do whatever you want to. Keep in mind that when you're weaving, you'll have a kind of a design. So when you first start weaving, the color will be on the inside and it will work its way out. So whatever color I choose, it will be the color it will be on the inside. So you can see I have lots of different yarns. Most of these yarns are the regular weight of yarn. This one's a little bit thinner, and this yarn is very fat, which will be nice to have a variety, but I'm not going to start with that. It's a little harder when you're starting to use a really thick yarn, so I would suggest a regular yarn. This one even has some little gold bits in it, which is fun, and this one changes colors. Starts out purple and goes to blue and pink, so that's fun also. So I think to start out, I will start out with this orange. So when you're starting, you want about 3 feet of yarn. So you can approximate that, or you can get your ruler out and measure. It doesn't really have to be exact. So about 3 feet of yarn. And then you're going to get your needle and you're going to thread your needle. Now, here's the eye of the needle. And I'm going to put my yarn through the needle. Now you can just feed it through if you want to do that. Another way that I actually learned this from a student, and I just thought it was fabulous. Another way to thread your yarn if you're having a hard time, one thing to do is to cut a fresh edge off of the end of the yarn because it has a tendency to fray. But you can do this. You can wrap the needle around like this. See how I've wrapped it around? Okay, and then you pinch it. So I'm pinching the yarn, pull out the needle, and then feed it through. And for some reason, it works a little bit easier. I have a lot of success with students who struggle with threading their needle. Okay, so now I'm going to tie a knot onto the end of this needle so it doesn't slip off. So I'm going to take this short end, lay it over the long end. See how I've made a loop there? And then I'm going to tuck it behind and through the loop. Okay, so I've tied that on. Now, when you're starting, the very first time that you're weaving, you're going to tape this yarn on the back. You're only going to do it one time. We taped our warps on the back, but this right here, we're going to tape on the back. The rest of them you will tie together. But this one, we tape on the back to start out. Okay, so there it is, and I've taped it on the back, not the front. And then I'm going to feed this needle through the center. I don't want to go around. I want to go up through the center like this. Okay? And I'm ready to weave. Weaving is really very simple. It's over, under, over, under, over, under. So what I mean by that is we'll just start anywhere. I'm going to see this warp right here, and I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go under it. So I've gone under that warp, and the next one I'm going to go over, and then I'm going to go under, and at this point I can pull it all the way through. So you want to make sure you're pulling your yarn all the way through. And I can pull it down a little bit. I won't pull it very far yet. So now I've got to look, whatever I did the last time, I want to do the opposite this time. So here's my warp, and you can see I went under this. So the next one, I'm going to go over. So I'm going over this one, and then under that, over, under, and I can go off the edge and pull it all the way through. Okay, now again, I look and see. Okay, on this warp, I went under it. So next, I'm going to go, this is my next warp, I'm going to go over that, almost went under, didn't I? Over that, under. Now see how I'm wiggling my needle back and forth? These warps are sometimes they're fibrous. That means they have little hairs. And sometimes you accidentally go through one where you're like caught a little hair, and that's not good. So if you just slide under and kind of wiggle your needle a little bit, it keeps that from happening. And then I'm going to go over, under. I might even go over this one. Whoop. Okay. And I'm going to pull it all the way through. And I'm just going to keep doing that until I run out of yarn or until I want to change colors. So here I went under. So what am I going to do next? I'm going to go over, under, over, under. Pull it through. Now, as you can see, I've made it around for my first row. And one thing I want to notice is if I'm doing it right, if I've made a mistake. The way I can tell if I've made a mistake is this should be the opposite of this next row. So for example, here on this warp, the first row I went over it, didn't I? My next row, you can see I'm going under it. And so that's good. I want to make sure that it's always the opposite thing that I'm doing. So on this warp here, I went under it. So this time, this row, you can see I will be going over it. And the same thing here. I went over here, so now I'm going to go under there. And you can kind of check to see if you're doing it right. You should have the opposite on each row. So let's look and see. See, on this one it's over. This one is under. The next row will be over, the next row will be under, and that's how it'll look through the rest of the weaving. So that kind of makes almost a checkerboard pattern. If you don't have that, I'll purposely do it wrong. So let's say this one here, I am ready to go over this one, but let's say I made a mistake and I went over this again. I went under this again. Okay, so here I've made my mistake. Now when I go over, under, I'm doing the same thing I did the row before, and you'll see they'll line up and it won't really be a weaving. See how they're lined up like that? If you notice that has happened, chances are you either made a mistake or you have an even number of warps. If you have an even number of warps, your weaving will look like this, where everything is lined up, not where it's kind of a checkerboard. So I'm going to fix that. Or one of the things you can do also, let's talk about fixing it. You can back up. See, I haven't done very much, so I can back up. Or if you want to, if you don't care, some people, they don't care. If you're a perfectionist, you're like, oh my gosh, there is a mistake and I must fix it. Well, then you can fix it. There are people though, and students, and I'm totally fine with this. They're like, it doesn't bother me. So what they would do is they would just start doing it correctly at some point. And if you just keep doing it correctly, you'll go back to getting a pattern. So if you've gone pretty far along, you don't have to back up. You can just start correcting it at that point. And even though those double lines will be there, it doesn't matter. They still look pretty cool. Now let's see, here's where, make sure I'm doing this right, that I'm correcting things. There. Okay, so on this one, I went under and I should have gone over. So I'm going to go over this time. But there's my checkerboard pattern. So you just keep weaving until you run out of yarn or until you want to change colors. Okay, well now I am ready to change colors. So I'm going to leave a little bit of yarn. See how I didn't use all of it up because I need to have enough yarn to tie on my new color. So in order to add color, I'm going to cut my needle off. So I think I'm going to use this little bit of pink here. I've got about 3 feet of it. And I'm going to tie this end of my yarn onto my orange yarn. So I'm just going to tie them together, and I'm going to show you how to do that because some students don't. It's kind of like tying your shoes, but some students don't know how to do that, or they struggle with this. So here's the orange, and I'm going to take my pink and I'm going to lay it on top. So it forms an X there. I'm going to take my pink and wrap it around the orange and comes back up. So that's pretty typical of a shoe, right? Okay, so then I'm going to take my pink again, I'm going to lay it on top of the orange. Now you see how I've left a little opening here. I haven't made it real tight like that. I've kind of laid it over in a way that it leaves an opening. Then I'm going to take this pink and I'm going to wrap it around, again, wrap it behind the orange and through. That actually makes what's called a square knot. Square knots are great for this kind of weaving because they are strong. Now I have 2 pieces of yarn that are sticking out like that. I can ignore them and keep on weaving, or I can trim them off. I don't want to cut off really close to my knot because then my knot will come apart. So I'm going to cut a little bit off. I still have a little bit sticking out, but when we are weaving, it won't matter because as we finish a few rows, we can just tuck this little part in. Now my other end of my pink yarn, I'm going to thread into my needle. Okay. So now I'm ready to keep on weaving. You can see I have added my pink yarn onto my orange, and I'm just going to keep on doing what I was doing, over, under. I noticed I went under here, so the next one I'm going to go over. Under, over, under, over. And remember, I kind of wiggle my needle a little bit when I'm going under so I don't accidentally go through one of the threads. And I pull it through. Sometimes when you get to that knot, it sort of hangs up a little bit. The right way, I've got my checkerboard pattern. So I just keep doing this for as much pink as I want, or until I run out of pink. Okay, I've got a little bit of yarn left, and I think I'm ready to change colors. Now I want to show you, I talked about having a thicker yarn. I want to show you how to do that at this point. So I'm going to cut off my needle. And this is my thicker yarn that I have. I have about 3 feet of this. It's pretty cool. I don't need a lot of it. The hardest thing about this kind of yarn is actually getting it through the eye of the needle. So what we can do is something special. When you can do this anytime you want to thread something and you have a hard time, you can use this for all of your threading of your yarn through your needle. I got a little piece of paper. I cut it out, a little strip. It fits through the eye of my needle. I had to make sure that it will do that. So I take this little paper. Okay, I fold it in half, and then I'm going to wrap it around the yarn. So I'm wrapping it around the yarn like that. Now if these are lined up, I kind of pinch it and I can feed it through the eye of my needle. And then at this point I can pull it through. See that? I love it. And then I will tie it together. Lay the short one on top of the long one, down, go below and through the loop. Now this is fuzzy, fluffy yarn. So I'm going to tie these together. It's a little tricky when it's a big fat yarn like this, but you can do it. So I'm going to wrap this around the pink one. You can pull plenty of length. The longer it is, the easier it is for you to tie things. Sometimes I have students who are trying to tie it and they have these tiny, tiny little pieces. I'm like, oh my gosh, you can't do that. It's too hard. And so then make it big. You can always trim it off. And then I take this, I've wrapped it around, I lay it on top of the pink, put that down, and go behind and through. Cut a little bit off. And I'm going to weave with this big chunky yarn. It's pretty fun, actually. In my head, I am often saying over, under, over, under. And I'm always checking my pattern, making sure I have a checkerboard pattern. As you can see, this thick yarn really makes an impact on my design. I like it. So I'm going to use this yarn now. So I'm going to cut my needle off. You can see I didn't use all my yarn up, so I'm going to cut it off about to here. And this is about 3 feet long. If you have yarn that's a lot longer than 3 feet, like let's say 6 or so, you just spend all your time pulling it through. It just doesn't seem to work as well. Than 3 feet, and you can see I'm pulling an awful lot. I didn't measure that out. I think this is more like, yeah, this is more like 4 or 5 feet. So it just makes for a lot of pulling. I'm almost to the end. As close to the edge as you want. If you can stop whenever you want to. Okay, I am finished. Now what do? What I do is I take my yarn and I'm going to go just inside here and go up, poke it through and come out anywhere and pull it through. Well, that was almost too far. So now I can't hardly, don't go that far. But see it's coming out, and I'm going to cut it off. Okay, so now I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut off at these little threads that are popping up here. I got my sharper scissors. Or another thing you can do is you can take your needle and you can just stick them in there. Just tuck them in. Either way, some of the ties that are close to the edge, you might want to do that. Tuck them in, but you can just cut them off. It doesn't really matter because it's got lots of nice texture. So there's my CD. Boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed making your CD weaving. I would love to see your artwork. So if you want, you can take a picture of it and send it to me at mrshooversartclass@gmail.com. And remember, every day is a great day to make art. Bye.